You've made a decision before, but you didn't actually decide. Something moved you. Before the thought had formed, before language showed up, before you could explain it. You've called it intuition, a hunch, a gut feeling, something less serious than thinking. But what if it isn't? What if it's the only part of you that is actually thinking? And what you call thinking, the slow voice inside your head, is just the part that comes afterward. The narrator, the translator, the story your mind tells about a decision it didn't make. You've tried to analyze that voice, but the voice arrived before the analysis every time. A mathematician at Oxford gave that voice a name. His name was Roger Penrose. He said, "Consciousness is not a computation." And the mathematics he used to prove it opened a door no one has been able to close. The quantum theory that proves you are not a machine. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the way you understand your own thinking will not survive. Here is what we've been told for 60 years in every textbook, every documentary, every neuroscience course. The brain is a computer. Neurons fire, signals propagate, thought emerges from the wiring. That's it. That's the whole story. 3 pounds of wet meat doing electrochemical arithmetic, and somewhere in that arithmetic, you show up. Conscious, aware, the lights are on. There is something it is like to be you, right now, hearing these words, and the standard model has no explanation for that last sentence. You're not calculating right now. You're experiencing. The texture of the air, the weight of attention, the quiet hum of being awake inside a body. That felt quality. That is the thing the standard model cannot locate. It has a name. The hard problem of consciousness. It has not moved in 30 years. And here's the thing. This isn't theoretical. You already know what I'm talking about. You knew who was calling before the phone rang. Or you walked into a room and you knew something was wrong before anyone had spoken. The air had a quality, and you knew. You didn't calculate it. You didn't consult a checklist. You didn't have time. The knowing arrived intact, already finished, before the slow voice in your head began constructing reasons. You've felt this more than once, and you've trusted it, even when you couldn't justify it. Standard cognitive science tries to explain this away. Pattern matching, thin slicing, confirmation bias. None of those words explain the speed. None of them explain the clarity. The knowing arrives before the model that's supposed to produce it. That gap is not a glitch. It is the thing this entire video is about. You don't need to believe any of this yet. Just notice that you felt it. That's enough for now. And in 1989, a mathematician at Oxford started asking a question from a completely different direction. He didn't ask what the brain does. He asked what the brain can't do. And the answer he found was the most disturbing answer in cognitive science. Roger Penrose collaborated with Stephen Hawking, proved the mathematics behind black holes, won the Nobel Prize in 2020. This is not a fringe figure. This is one of the most decorated physicists alive. And in 1989, he wrote a book. And in that book, calmly, carefully, he said something the field of artificial intelligence has never forgiven him for. He said, "Consciousness cannot be simulated." He said, "The human mind does things no algorithm can do." He said, "Whatever you are doing when you understand a mathematical truth, no Turing machine could ever do." And he proved it using the most unlikely tool in the philosophy of mind. He proved it using Gödel. We'll come back to Gödel. Hold the name. First, the man who picked up the phone on the other end of Penrose's theory. Stuart Hameroff. An anesthesiologist, 30 years putting people to sleep for surgery. And here is the quiet, embarrassing secret at the center of his profession. Nobody knew how anesthesia worked. We knew that it worked every time. You breathe the gas, you count down from 10, and at some specific concentration, the lights go off. Consciousness ends. Not dreams, not memory, consciousness itself. But the mechanism, the actual physical thing happening in the brain to make awareness stop, was unknown. Decades of theories, none of them held. Hameroff had been looking somewhere most neuroscientists never look. Not at the neurons, at the structures inside the neurons. Hollow protein tubes, microscopic, geometrical. Microtubules. And he had noticed something. The gases that turn off consciousness, they bind to those tubes. Not to the synapses, not to the outer membrane, to the tubes inside. He read Penrose's book. He picked up the phone. Picture them for a moment. A mathematical physicist who has worked at the highest abstractions of general relativity, and an anesthesiologist whose hands have, for 30 years, placed the mask on patients and watched consciousness end on a stopwatch. These are not the same kind of mind. They shouldn't have a productive conversation. But what each of them needed was sitting on the other one's desk. Penrose needed a physical place in the brain, small enough, quiet enough to support quantum effects. Hameroff needed a theory that explained why his anesthesia mask was the most reliable consciousness switch ever discovered. The microtubules, geometric crystalline scaffolds inside every neuron, sat at the intersection. So the mathematician and the anesthesiologist sat down together, and they built a theory. Orch-OR. Orchestrated Objective Reduction. The single most ambitious answer ever proposed to the question of what you are. But before we get into the theory, one more moment you already know. Because this next one will tell you why Penrose's idea isn't just abstract. You've been living inside it your whole life. You'd been working on the problem for hours, at your desk, with your tools, full focus, coffee, notes. Nothing came. You stood up, you walked away. You showered, or went for a walk, or did the dishes, and the answer arrived. Whole, complete, without effort. Every creative person knows this. Every mathematician, every engineer, every writer. The answer never comes when you press. The answer comes when you stop pressing. The standard story calls this diffuse mode, unconscious processing in the background. Fine. But that description doesn't explain why. Why does the brain solve better when conscious effort lets go? Orch-OR has an answer. Classical, sequential thinking interferes with the quantum process. Forced focus collapses the superposition early, prematurely. When you walk away, when the verbal narrator goes quiet, the wave is allowed to stay wide, to hold many possibilities at once, and then collapse on the one that fits. The shower lets the wave stay wide. The answer arrives because you stepped out of its way. Pause this for a second. The first intuition that came to mind while watching this, write it in the comments. One word. Don't analyze it. Don't edit it. The point of the exercise is to notice what arrives before you decide what to write. That arrival, that pre-verbal answer, is the thing this entire video is about. Now, let me show you, as plainly as I can, what Penrose and Hameroff actually claim. No equations, no jargon, just the picture. Deep inside your neurons, deeper than chemistry, deeper than synapses, there are these microtubules, hollow lattices, protein scaffolds. For decades, they were considered structural, just bones inside the cell, holding shape. Penrose and Hameroff said, no, they are not structural. They are computational. And not the kind of computation a computer does. Inside those tubes, at scales smaller than the chemistry of neurotransmitters, individual proteins called tubulins can exist in a quantum superposition. Multiple states at once, not 0 or 1, both. A wave of possibility smeared across what could be. Each tubulin is a tiny dumbbell with a single electron at its core, flickering between two configurations. Multiply that by the millions of tubulins inside a single neuron, then by 86 billion neurons in a single brain. The combinatorial space is staggering. Your brain may be the most quantum-rich object in the known universe. And then, something happens. The wave collapses. The superposition resolves. A single reality emerges. One choice, one configuration, one state selected from many. In standard quantum mechanics, that collapse needs an observer, a measurement, a photon hitting a screen. But Penrose proposed something stranger. The collapse can happen on its own, triggered by gravity itself, by the geometry of space-time, becoming unstable when too many possibilities are held in superposition too long. Objective reduction, the universe collapsing its own wave function, with no observer required, and in your brain, across billions of microtubules, orchestrated by the structure of the neuron, these collapses happen rhythmically, 40 times a second, maybe more. Each collapse is a moment of consciousness. That is the theory. That is the whole theory, said plainly. You are not produced by the brain. The neural firing is the aftermath, the slow, classical, electrochemical wake of an event that happened underneath. The event itself is the collapse. The moment a wave of possibility becomes a single experienced reality. And that experienced reality, that resolving, is you. 40 times a second, for as long as you have been alive. If this is right, and we will come to whether it is right, then the question stops being how the brain produces consciousness. Because the brain doesn't produce consciousness. The brain tunes it, the way a radio tunes a signal, the way a lens focuses light that was already there. You are not generated by the machine. You are received by it. That sentence is doing a lot of work. Let me give you one more moment from your own life to make sure it actually lands. Sit with this one carefully. You've had moments, perhaps in grief, perhaps at the edge of sleep, perhaps standing in front of something genuinely beautiful, when you knew something, and you could not put it into words. Not yet. Not because the words didn't exist, because the knowing was a shape that no sentence could hold. You tried to translate it. Of course you did. And whatever sentence you produced was smaller than the knowing. Always smaller. The sentence was the receipt. The knowing was the event. That is what Orch-OR is describing. The event underneath the words. The collapse before the translation. The moment your mind became one specific shape, and then your language scrambled after the fact to label what had happened. You are not your sentences. You are the thing that arrives before them. This isn't easy material. You don't have to settle it tonight. Just notice, when the words run out, what is left? We have to come back to Gödel now, because this is where Penrose's argument actually begins, and once you see the shape of it, you can't unsee it. In 1931, a young Austrian logician proved something mathematicians thought was impossible. He proved this: no formal system of mathematics, complex enough to do basic arithmetic, can prove all of the truths within itself. There will always be statements, true statements, that the system cannot reach by its own rules. This is the incompleteness theorem, one of the most famous results in the history of human thought, and it has a strange consequence that almost no one who hears about it ever gets told. It means any system of rules, any algorithm, any computer program, any Turing machine, has truths it cannot see from inside. The system can be told the truth from outside, but it cannot prove it. It cannot verify itself. Now, here is Penrose's move, the one that infuriated half the philosophy departments in the world. Penrose said, "But mathematicians can see those truths. When you are shown a Gödel statement, a sentence the system cannot prove, but that is plainly, demonstrably true from outside, you, the human, can see that it is true. You don't run the algorithm. You see it. And if you can see something an algorithm provably cannot see, then something inside you is not an algorithm." This is where the standard objection arrives. But maybe the brain is just a very large algorithm. Maybe the rules are too complex to write down, but they're still rules. Penrose's response is precise. If they're rules, they generate a formal system. Gödel's theorem applies to all formal systems. So either the mathematician cannot see Gödel truths, which contradicts the entire history of mathematics, or the mathematician is doing something non-algorithmic, something that is not the running of a program, something that requires a physics deeper than the physics of computation. And that is where the quantum part stops feeling like a leap. If classical, computable physics cannot produce a mind that sees Gödel truths, then the mind must be running on physics that is not classical and not computable. And the only physics we have that fits is quantum. Specifically, the collapse, the non-deterministic, the non-algorithmic, the irreducible moment when the wave becomes a particle. The one place, uniquely in all of physics, that no algorithm can predict. The collapse is where the universe stops computing. And the collapse is where Penrose says, you live. I want to be clear. This isn't settled. The Gödelian argument has gaps. Smart people have argued against it for 30 years. And the fact that the consensus had to keep arguing for 3 decades is itself a signal. The argument is alive. It is unsettled. It has not been put to bed. And while the philosophers have argued, the experiments have started to arrive. I owe you the strongest version of the criticism, because when a theory feels beautiful, the temptation is to skip the part where it gets attacked. I'm not going to do that. In 2000, the physicist Max Tegmark, serious figure, credible voice, published a calculation. He took the proposed quantum states in microtubules. He took the temperature of the human brain, warm, wet, electrically noisy. And he asked, how long could a quantum coherence survive in that environment? His answer was femtoseconds, far, far faster than cognition. Cognition happens on the scale of milliseconds, trillions of times slower. The conclusion, if you took it at face value, was simple. Quantum coherence in the brain is impossible. Orch-OR was dead on arrival. For a long time, that was the prevailing view. Then something inconvenient happened, in a completely different field. In 2007, a research group at Berkeley, led by Graham Fleming, was studying photosynthesis, how plants capture sunlight with near-perfect efficiency. Nothing humans build comes close. And what they found, using a technique called two-dimensional electronic spectroscopy, was that the energy transfer in photosynthetic complexes was happening through quantum coherence. Inside a warm, wet biological system, at room temperature. The exact conditions Tegmark said were impossible. The leaf had figured out how to keep the wave from collapsing. The leaf had figured out how to think quantum mechanically. At room temperature. In water. If a leaf can do it, why not a brain? And then 2024 happened. A research group at Wellesley College, led by Mike Wiest, ran an experiment. Small, careful, properly controlled. They took rats. They divided them into two groups. One group got a drug called ipothalone B, a compound that binds to microtubules and stabilizes them. Then they exposed both groups to anesthetic gas, and they measured how long it took each rat to lose consciousness. If consciousness has nothing to do with microtubules, as the standard theory has insisted for decades, stabilizing the tubes should have no effect. The rats given ipothalone took, on average, 69 seconds longer to become unconscious. Statistically significant. A large effect size. The drug that protects microtubules also protects consciousness. This is one study, in one species, with one drug. I am not telling you Orch-OR is proven. I'm telling you the prediction Penrose and Hameroff made decades ago has begun to be confirmed at the bench. The theory is no longer purely philosophical. It is making contact with experiment. And the field that was supposed to have buried this theory 25 years ago is, quietly, reopening the file. Which leaves us with one question. And it is not a small one. I cannot tell you Penrose is right. The theory is unproven. The mathematics is still contested. The experiments are early. But I can tell you what is at stake. And I can tell you what shifts inside you when you let the possibility be real for 1 minute. If Penrose is right, even partially, then the picture you were handed at age 15 is wrong. You are not an algorithm running on wet hardware. You are not a chemical accident that woke up. You are not a calculation that learned to feel. You are the collapse. The moment a universe of possibility resolves into one specific reality, 40 times a second, for as long as you have been alive. The brain is not generating you. The brain is the antenna, the instrument tuned by millions of years of evolution to receive the kind of signal that you happen to be. This is not religion. I want to be clear. This is not a metaphysical conclusion smuggled in under scientific dress. The theory could still be wrong. The experiments could still fail to replicate. The mathematics could still find its gap. But something has changed in the last 5 years. The conversation has moved. Serious physicists no longer laugh at the question. Serious neuroscientists no longer assume the brain is a wet computer. The hard problem of consciousness, which was supposed to dissolve under more data, has refused to dissolve. It has gotten harder. And in the gap that the standard model has left open, in the missing explanation for why there is something it is like to be you, Penrose's theory is the only theory that does not begin by assuming the very thing it is trying to explain. That is not nothing. That is the most you can ask of a theory at the frontier.
Think about what this means.
For the long, anxious question, the one nobody asks honestly, what happens when the antenna stops working? The standard model says, when the brain dies, the lights go off. The show is over. And that may still be true. I am not making a metaphysical claim here. But the antenna model leaves the question genuinely open. In a way, the wet computer model never did. Because if the brain is receiving rather than generating, then the question of what happens to consciousness when the receiver fails is no longer rhetorical. It is empirical. And it is exactly the question several thousand near-death experience accounts, dismissed as hallucinations for decades, have been quietly asking the field to take seriously. I am not telling you to believe those accounts. I am telling you that, if Penrose's framework holds, they become harder to dismiss out of hand. The framework doesn't prove them. It changes the terms. You were never a machine. You may have spent your whole life being told otherwise. You may have spent your whole life trying to be otherwise. More rational, more sequential, more like a clean line of code. Suppressing the voice that arrives before the analysis, distrusting the knowing that arrives before the words. If Penrose is even partially right, that voice is not noise. That knowing is not weakness. It is the part of you that is actually doing the thinking. Everything else is the receipt. So, one last question. I will not answer it for you. Is consciousness something the brain produces? Or is consciousness something the brain tunes into? The answer changes everything. And the fact that we don't yet know which one is true may be the most important sentence in modern science. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'm Codex Origin. Stay strange.